So this is a little information session about retrofitting your home. It's part of the Green and Healthy Futures programme. So Healthy Homes Frome is a little project that's being run in partnership with Frome Town Council, us at the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and also Frome Medical Practice. So we're running these little information sessions as well as drop-ins in Frome, and as well as some work through the medical practice as well. So my name's Eleanor and I work at the Centre for Sustainable Energy. So we are a charity based in Bristol. We've been around since 1979, and our aims are to meet the twin challenges of climate change and fuel poverty. So we are growing quite a lot at the moment. I think we have about 80 staff, and we've got approximately 70 projects running at any one time. So we've got our advice team, as well as a communities team and a research team. So I work in the advice team, and within that, we have our Safe and Warm Somerset project. So that covers all of the Somerset area. So we work in partnership with all of these councils, including obviously Mendip District Council. The aim of this project is to improve the energy efficiency of all homes across Somerset, make homes warmer, cheaper to heat, and healthier to reduce the risk of ill health and hospital admissions. So today we'll obviously be talking about reducing household carbon emissions, but with a focus on what we can do to our homes. So just for a bit of context, you'll be familiar with the fact that there's a target to get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We've made quite good strides in terms of our household energy usage, but it's still, at least in 2017, still totals about 14% of the total UK emissions. So there's some work to be done yet. The UK has some of the least efficient housing stock in Europe. 45% of existing properties are band D, and 19% are E or lower. So what can we do to improve the situation? As I said, sort of reducing energy demand, both through behavioural change and through efficiency measures, decarbonisation of the electricity supply and heating system fuel sources, and working towards a decentralised energy system. So working towards things like community energy schemes and domestic prosumers as well. So on the right here, we've got what's called the energy hierarchy. So at the top there, we've got energy conservation, and then moving on to energy efficiency. And then the very last step is renewable energy. So as I said, we're going to be focusing on energy conservation and energy efficiency being the things that we should focus on first. So it's a very difficult thing, I think, to sort of know where to start with, what you can do to retrofit your home. So we would always say to focus on making those behavioural changes and those low cost small measures first. Then to look at having a survey done potentially of your property, which will identify any repairs and maintenance that might need to be addressed first to make your home retrofit ready. And then draft proofing and ventilation to sort of increase air tightness. And then the sort of more high cost, higher risk measures. So things like insulation, upgrading windows and doors. And then finally looking into heating options and energy generation. And this image here is the retrofit guidance wheel, which is a really helpful tool, which I will share with you, because it sort of goes through all the available sort of measures and sort of highlights things that might be of concern. So at CSE, we always advocate taking a whole house approach to retrofit. So that's looking into a broad range of factors, not just energy usage or bill savings. Oh, sorry. So that includes comfort within the home, ventilation, air quality, any maintenance needs, as well as sort of heritage and aesthetics as well. So it's always best to look at retrofit measures together rather than in isolation, because there might be a logical order to do things rather than having to sort of rip things out and redo them at a later date. And often it might be more cost effective to install multiple measures together. So taking this kind of approach helps to reduce the risk of negative unintended consequences. And then sort of connected to this whole house approach is the fabric first sort of model. So it's looking at prioritizing repairs and insulation and draft proofing and ventilation, and then looking at potential add-ons like solar panels. Doing it this way reduces the risk of a performance gap. So for example, installing an air source heat pump in a property that isn't suitably insulated means that air source heat pump isn't going to perform as well as expected. So doing so makes homes more comfortable and easier to keep warm and healthy, as well as protecting the building fabric, so reducing the need for sort of further work down the line. And reducing energy demand first makes it easier for any sort of building services that you need in there to be efficient and meet household needs. And ultimately, to sort of decarbonize the whole energy system, we need to sort of first look at reducing our energy demand. We're going to be focusing, I suppose, more on traditional homes. So with modern homes, they're a little bit sort of easier to tackle in a way. It's a little bit more straightforward to know what to do. So a modern home is one that's been built with more sort of modern materials. It's been sort of set up very differently, designed very differently. It's got a damp-proof course. It's got ventilation built in through things like trickle vents, and also potentially mechanical ventilation as well. The materials have vapor barriers to stop moisture movement going in, whereas any kind of traditional building is not going to have a damp-proof course, and there's going to be a lot of sort of uncontrolled ventilation. So things like fireplaces and windows and doors, and all the materials are going to be breathable and be vapor open. So some common considerations, I suppose, more so with older buildings. These are all sort of very interconnected and worth sort of considering, as a bundle, I suppose. So moisture movement within the property. So kitchens and bathrooms are naturally going to be high moisture areas because of cooking and bathing. So that's where you really need to ensure that there is appropriate ventilation. Otherwise, you're going to end up with damp and condensation issues. But you sort of need to consider moisture movement throughout the home sort of more generally by thinking carefully about ventilation systems and also the materials that are being used. Moving on to ventilation. So in a traditional building, there's going to be sort of low air tightness, which will result in uncontrolled ventilation. In a more modern building, it's going to be more airtight, and ventilation will need to be consciously considered. So using things like extractor fans. So quite a common issue is where you've got a traditional home that's been sort of altered over the years, and sort of unsuitable materials have been used, which have, or things like double glazing has been added, which has sort of created a slightly more sort of airtight property, and then you sort of end up with this sort of moisture imbalance. So it needs to be, so you're losing some of that passive ventilation, and you need to sort of factor in more sort of conscious ventilation systems. So as I mentioned sort of previously, we're talking about sort of breathable materials. So traditional materials tend to be breathable, while modern materials are not. Modern materials are designed to prevent any movement of moisture, while traditional materials are moisture open. So it's important to select materials carefully to avoid damp issues. And so condensation is often sort of the most sort of common form of damp, but it is important to identify the kind of damp that you're dealing with, because there'll be a different strategy for dealing with it. So penetrating damp can often be dealt with quite easily. Rising damp is a little bit more tricky, but a lot of what is considered rising or penetrating damp is actually condensation, caused by cold spots on the walls, often due to poorly installed insulation or inappropriate materials. And condensation issues can be remedied through sort of a number of interventions. Some of them very cheap, so sort of the behavioural change kind of stuff, and some of them more costly if it's sort of more of an ingrained issue. So another thing to consider is cold bridging. So this occurs when a material such as metal transfers heat at a significantly higher rate than the material surrounding it. Cold bridges let heat out and create cold spots. They're usually a small surface area, but they account for a lot of heat loss within a property. So sometimes up to 30% of a building's heat loss could be sort of attributed to cold bridging. The more you insulate the surrounding area, the higher proportion of heat is lost through the cold bridge. So it's something that's really important to tackle. And often it's better to have less insulation and correct the cold bridging as much as possible. So these are a couple of images from thermal imaging surveys. So as you can see, sort of the darker spots there are colder. So the right-hand one there is by a window, and you can clearly see that's there's a much lower temperature there, higher rate of heat loss. So when thinking about retrofitting older properties, it's really important to know whether you're in a listed building or any kind of a conservation area. So there's a link there to Historic England's website. It's very easy to just have a search and see whether that's the case. So for listed buildings, any internal work you would need consent for, and for sort of anything in a conservation area, it's sort of okay to go ahead without having to do sort of any consultation. But if in any doubt, I would definitely advise sort of speaking to a planning officer and getting their take on it. So it is trickier with properties that are listed or in conservation areas, and as well as there being sort of planning issues. You don't want to sort of take away from the character of a property in a lot of cases. So the solution in most cases is to focus on internal work, again, to sort of prioritize lower cost measures or measures with a lower risk or work that's reversible. So draft proofing is a very straightforward way to sort of improve the sort of air tightness. Secondary glazing, in a lot of cases, that's, you can get secondary glazing that's very easily sort of taken down, and will actually improve comfort quite a bit. Loft and floor insulation and internal wall insulation, obviously their internal wall insulation is obviously a much larger measure, and something that's definitely worth getting advice with before going ahead. If you are retrofitting an old home, it's good to sort of do some research into appropriate materials. So there's various sort of aerogel products available. So that's an insulating gel and very good for getting into sort of small nooks and crannies, to avoid things like thermal bridging. And where something like internal wall insulation wouldn't be possible or appropriate, it is possible to use something like diathanite, which is an insulating lime plaster, which can do quite a lot actually for the property, both to sort of reduce heat loss, but also sort of create a healthier sort of living environment, particularly if it's replacing sort of just standard sort of gypsum on the walls. And then finally, looking at an efficient heating system. So heat pumps are a good option for some homes, but as I kind of sort of alluded to earlier, it is really good to look into doing sort of insulation work prior to having a heat pump installed, so that it's not as costly to run. And if it's not possible to sort of get your property up to that level of sort of air tightness, then it might be worth looking into sort of other options. Okay. So if external work is possible, then this is sort of the guidance for external wall insulation. So these are sort of some examples here from Bristol. So yeah, we've got a terraced house there where so sort of neighbouring houses in the street have been rendered and have lost some of their sort of architectural features, I suppose, already. So it's more likely for sort of permission to be sort of granted for external wall insulation, because although it sort of juts out slightly, there's not sort of, it doesn't look sort of hugely out of place. It is, if you get someone who's sort of very, very skilled at this, they'll be able to sort of mimic sort of existing architectural features as well, which will sort of reduce the impact too. So these two images here on the right, the top one is before external wall insulation, and the bottom one is after. And I know that they're not massive, so it's not sort of possible to see sort of a big difference, but I've actually visited this property, and you wouldn't know until you're sort of looking closely that external wall insulation has actually been installed here, and it makes a massive difference, especially with sort of quite a large detached property like that. So it is possible, but it is a very costly measure. and there's more sort of risk involved. So definitely worth getting some advice before going ahead. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that comment, Cara. Yeah, yeah, heat pumps would be cheaper to run for homes that rely on electrical heating. Definitely. Yeah, it's a good option in those cases. So I thought we would just sort of briefly touch on various sort of insulation measures that you could consider. So we've got pitched and flat roof insulation, as well as room and roof insulation. I think room and roof insulation is something that tends to not be ignored, but sort of the funding sort of hasn't been there in the past. So I think there's a lot of homes that might benefit from having that work done. And then obviously there's cavity wall insulation, which is sort of pretty straightforward. It's now done to a much better standard than it was previously, unfortunately. So in most cases, we're talking about an installer sort of coming out and drilling a small hole in the wall and popping a camera in there, sort of inspect the cavity and make sure it's appropriate. And then sort of filling it with something like these little insulating beads. And we've sort of spoken briefly about internal and external wall insulation. Unfortunately, not quite as straightforward and a bit more costly. But yeah, definitely worth considering if you've got a solid wall property, and all other sort of measures have been sort of considered, I suppose. And then floor insulation, again, sort of one that's a little bit less common. So with suspended floors, it is a bit of upheaval, but it's much more straightforward than sort of insulating a solid floor. So the bottom right image there is something called QBot. So it's a little robot that's sort of dropped under the floor and sort of does the insulation work. So yeah, something to consider. And then sort of double and even triple glazing is a good option if it's possible to replace single glazed windows. And then secondary glazing, if there are any sort of heritage issues, secondary glazing's a really good option. And then again, just sort of thinking generally about air tightness and draft proofing. And then in terms of low carbon heating, yeah, you may be aware that there's a ban on gas heating for new homes coming in 2025. So they're likely to be built with air source heat pumps, and they will be sort of built to sort of a good standard in terms of their air tightness. So that, yeah, it will be sort of appropriate for those properties to be heated by air source heat pumps, and it'll be efficient to do so. So at the moment, it's only sort of 7% of UK homes currently use electric heating. Obviously, we need to move towards more homes being heated that way. So options include air or ground or water source heat pumps, solar thermal panels for hot water, and biomass boilers. And everything sort of seems to be sort of pointing towards heat pumps as being sort of the most appropriate way to move forward in terms of heating our homes. But suitability depends on the property and the householder. Behavior and home adaptations often required. So it does require a little bit more sort of thinking about and a bit more of a sort of change in the way sort of you use the system, especially if you're used to something like a gas central heating system and getting that heat sort of as and when you need it. So yeah, finally, after you've thought about sort of insulation measures and your heating system, then we would look at sort of energy generation. So solar PV is sort of the most common form that you'll see, but there's also micro wind and micro hydro. So we previously had the feed-in tariff, which was obviously very popular. It's now been replaced with something called the Smart Export Guarantee, which sort of results in sort of lower payments. So rather than getting your sort of payment from the government, you're getting your Smart Export Guarantee from an energy supplier. I don't think sort of all suppliers are offering this at the moment. But some do, and if it's something that you're considering, it's worth sort of comparing the different rates that they are going to sort of pay sort of per unit. It sort of doesn't, as I said, it doesn't sort of result in sort of anywhere near, unfortunately, the same payments as the feed-in tariff, but it's always cheaper in sort of the long run to use the energy that you're generating sort of rather than exporting it if possible. So then sort of other options for avoiding exporting electricity that you generate are battery storage, electric vehicle charging points, so using the battery of the electric vehicle and electric heating as well. So sort of we're in the future, well, we've already got, I think, a couple of time of use tariffs available. So that is a tariff that sort of tells you when more electricity is being generated than is being consumed, and therefore is cheaper for you. If you're on this time of use tariff, you get to sort of benefit from that cheaper electricity, and then use that to use sort of high energy appliances, and it can work out quite well if you're able to sort of shift your energy usage about a bit. So there'll be sort of more of that in the future. Hopefully more smart appliances. So things like washing machines, where you can sort of control them sort of remotely. You can put timers on so that you're able to benefit from things like lower rates of electricity. And then things like peer-to-peer energy trading. So that picture on the right there is, I believe that's some social housing in Brixton, I believe, where so this was a bit of a pilot project, where there were solar panels installed, and the sort of occupants were able to sort of buy and sell that energy that's being generated by the solar panels sort of between themselves, rather than having to sort of use a middleman. And then vehicle to grid charging, we're also going to see sort of some more of that. So using your car as a sort of a giant battery and being able to sort of being paid to export energy back to the grid. Okay, so Ecotricity don't do time of use tariffs just yet, but Octopus definitely do. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so looking at funding now, There is, it's been around for a while now. There's eco funding, so it's called the Energy Company Obligation. So all of the larger suppliers will pay into this central pot of funding. It's a nationwide grant scheme. It normally just covers sort of simple, straightforward loft and cavity wall insulation and boiler upgrades. And that's available to people on certain benefits and people with sort of low household income. And then there's the renewable heat incentive, which is a grant that you can get for generating low carbon heat. So from heat pumps, solar thermal panels, and biomass boilers. So unfortunately, it's not sort of a grant to pay for the upfront costs, but you can sort of receive it as a quarterly payment, and you get sort of paid for every kilowatt hour unit of heat that you generate. And you can receive that for 7 years. And in some cases, it does work out quite well and does sort of help sort of recoup some of those costs. There was some consultation about the renewable heat incentive not too long ago, and it's looking like it's going to be replaced by something called the Clean Heat Grant, and that looks like it's coming next year, and that will be an upfront grant to go towards the cost of installing, I think mostly heat pumps at this stage, but potentially biomass as well. And it looks like it's sort of £4,000 towards the cost. So I think that could help lots more people. So yeah, a bit more of an incentive really to potentially get one of these systems installed. Okay, so also in Somerset, we have something called the Local Authority Delivery Scheme. So this is the next phase of the Green Homes Grant Scheme. That, and as the name suggests, it's delivered by the local authority rather than a sort of nationwide sort of free-for-all. So individual sort of local authorities were invited to apply for this funding, and Somerset was successful. So this is a grant that covers a range of measures, so all manner of insulation measures as well as low carbon heating. You can get single glazed windows upgraded, so replaced with double glazed, draft proofing and smart heating controls as well. So to qualify, household income must be £30,000 or below, and you must have an EPC of D or below. So if you don't have an EPC, it's still worth getting in touch if it's something that you think you might be suitable for, because we can sort of make an assessment of whether the property is likely to be sort of that sort of level. So we have had a lot of interest in this scheme. So the first round of funding has sort of all been allocated. So what we're doing at the moment is adding anyone who's interested to a waiting list for a next potential round of funding and getting back in contact when that's available. So yeah, I'd strongly encourage you, if you do think that you'd be eligible for this or know anyone who would be, it is worth getting in contact and putting your name down, because the funding covers such a wide range of measures. It can really do quite a lot to improve a property. I'll just have a little look at the chat. Yeah, okay, yeah. So it's not, we're sort of waiting to hear about the next sort of round of the lads funding. Yeah. Okay. Something else that's available in the Mendip District Council area is the EPC and EPC improvement grants. So if you don't have, sorry, I realized that I've been saying EPC a lot and I haven't sort of explained what that is. So it's an energy performance certificate. and any house that is sold or rented out needs to have one of these. It's an assessment of the home and how much energy it uses, looking at things like the structure, insulation measures, heating system, heating controls, to give it an overall rating and then suggest sort of improvements. So this is a grant to pay for a new EPC where there isn't one, or it's not it's out of date. So there's up to £500 for owner occupiers or private landlords of properties with an EPC rating of D, E, or F towards the cost of improvement measures. And up to £1,000 for private landlords of properties with an EPC rating of D, E, or F, where one of the tenants is receiving a means tested benefit or has some kind of other vulnerability. So another option for sort of financing any kind of measures is through Lendology. So they are a community interest company, and they work very closely with a lot of councils in this area to provide these low interest loans. And something as well available in Somerset is the Safer Home Grant. So this is potentially grant funding of up to £10,000 available to make homes safer, healthier, and warmer. So if anyone's in receipt of a means test benefit, they may qualify for this. It goes through Lendology, and I think they sort of assess whether a grant or a loan would be more suitable. But something else they offer is a renewable energy and energy efficiency loan. And this is a low interest loan where you can borrow up to £25,000. And then £5,000 for park homes and houseboats. So they're very much set up to offer loans for home improvements, any kind of home improvements. And then as well as that, they do offer sort of these specific renewable energy loans as well. So something else that's available through the Centre for Sustainable Energy is the Future Proof project. So this was initially a pilot project funded by BEIS, Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. So it was sort of free at that point, but now it's offering sort of paid for services. But it's through the Centre for Sustainable Energy. So this is sort of a lower cost than sort of going elsewhere, and all of the advice is impartial as well. So the mission of the project is to make it easy for homeowners and contractors in the west of England to carry out energy saving improvements and refurbishments with confidence. And how they do that is to advise homeowners on appropriate and effective retrofitting strategies, as well as building a network of trusted installers and providing training for builders to learn low carbon retrofitting techniques. So it's sort of two parts to it. It's giving the advice to householders who are interested and sort of motivated to make these improvements, but it's also making sure that the builders and installers are there with the skills and the expertise to carry out the work, sort of linking them up. So initially, we were just in sort of Bristol and South Gloss and North Somerset, but now it covers Baines and Somerset and Wiltshire as well. So we've got quite a widespread and sort of working on building up that network. So there's sort of good coverage throughout all these areas. So the services that are offered, so there's an introductory energy advice, which includes a summary report. So looking at the whole house, looking at what could be done, and sort of a logical order for it to be done in as well. There is the option to have a full survey and a retrofit coordination plan. So I believe that would involve one of our retrofit coordinators sort of coming out to the property to create sort of an in-depth plan. We do also offer planning appeal advice. If you're struggling with getting sort of work agreed, and as well if it's quite a complex and in-depth project with a lot of work going on, there's also our retrofit project management as well. So if you're sort of interested in any sort of free and impartial advice or any of the funding that I've mentioned, then yeah, please do feel free to contact Safe and Warm Somerset. That's our free phone advice line there. We're open Monday to Friday, 10 till 4. And there's our email address as well. If you're interested in more sort of in-depth retrofit advice, then it's worth contacting Future-Proof on that number again, also free phone advice line. And there's the email. And also feel free to visit the website and have a look there as well. And then if you're just sort of interested in getting a little bit more advice on measures or behavioural advice, there's CSE's website. We've got a whole host of resources on there, lots of fact sheets, as I said, on these individual measures and renewables. And then there's information on Frome Town Council's website about sort of upcoming events. So the next session will be run by my colleague James, who works on the Future-Proof project, and he'll be looking sort of specifically at air source heat pumps. Okay, yeah, so managed to sort of whiz through that. Okay, so just having a look at the chat. Okay, so Cara asks, how much is the Future-Proof support? I don't know off the top of my head, I'm afraid, Cara, but all of the prices are listed on the website if you wanted to go and take a look. And I believe that there's a bit of an offer on at the moment for the surveys as sort of an introductory offer. So they are at a lower cost at the moment than they sort of will be sort of going forward. So yeah, if anyone is interested in getting further advice for Future-Proof, I think, yeah, now is the time. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you all so much for coming along. Have a lovely evening. Thanks so much.